Hi, welcome to Bridget Podcast. My name is Christel, the founder and creative director and AI XR innovator at Cherryadi Digital Media. With a vision of bridging the generational gap of technology, one quality conversation at a time, in this podcast we will be featuring insightful conversations with experts in mental health, creative technology, education, and human-computer interaction. Expect to take away practical insights from every conversation that you can implement to your daily life in your different roles and spheres of influence. Together, let's co-create a safer digital future for our next generation and be a part of the change as we shape the future together. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mirror XR podcast again. My name is Christel, and I'm today having a very special guest with us, Judith. Thank you so much for coming to our studio. And oh my goodness, I've been briefly talking about the content that we will cover today, and I'm super excited. I'm mind blown myself, right? So here we are. We're gonna unpack about narrative transformation. Probably you've never heard about it because it was my first time hearing about this last time, not that, But yeah, it's a really cool concept that Judith's been researching and implementing in the community as well. And I think it's mind-blowing when we, unpack about a little bit more of why we do and how we approach Mirror XR as a story living experience, not just storytelling, is that it's interesting that we craft, research principles, psychological gaming principles to create a story that people can then empathize in because they feel like they're in the shoe of that character in a virtual world. Yeah. So I would love to, if you can introduce more about what you do, Judith, and why you do what you do, that you come to this point of very revelational not just theory, but in practice as well.
Yeah, okay. Look, where do I start? I'm a very proud First Nations woman and I come from the Ngarrindjeri community. A lot of people will associate the $50 note with my community. So great uncle is on there, David Unipen, who was a phenomenal creator and inventor. And so there is representation on the $50 note. I'm also a descendant of the Kaurna community, and I've got cultural connections across most of South Australia. Look, I am I come in all-round experience, I guess. At the moment, I'm the Indigenous Governance and Engagement Lead at Menzies School of Health Research, and I support their Stay Strong mental health program. So we work from a strength-based approach, everything First Nations co-designed, resources, apps, and in the digital mental health space. On top of that, I'm an employee assistance program clinician. So I've been doing that for about 9 years now, which means I provide counselling support to the workforce if they feel that they need it. It could be related to work, it could be related to personal struggles, it could be related to anything really. I've also been providing professional, cultural and clinical supervision to workers who feel like they wanted to get some support around anything that might be troubling them. I've been counselling for a very long time. I have a lot of experience in terms of First Nations mental health and particularly specialise in narrative therapy, as you mentioned. Yeah. I have been delivering the training for about 16 years. Wow. And still kind of involved in, from being a student to coordinating the diploma of narrative therapy. And then managing the registered training organisation and still being involved in some capacity. So a very long time with that discipline and very passionate about, seeing it as a way of life, actually, a bit of a philosophy of how powerful stories are in terms of shaping our lives and our experiences and our understanding of how we deal with problems in our lives.
Yeah, wow. We've been running workshops and talks about the future of storytelling, but I think, we focus about how this virtual reality and the new medium can actually take things to the next level. But the thing is, as much as they're powerful tools, they're actually just tools. Like last night itself, we were doing like a panel in ILA, and I was just, we don't have microphone today, but like legit what the microphone does is just amplify the voice, right? It's not the voice.
Yeah.
Now, I can't emphasize strong enough that virtual reality, extended reality, AI, like whatever new tools we have, they're just tools. They're not the story, they're not the content. So they're just amplifying what the content creator puts into their platform.
Yeah.
Now, from your expertise, Judith, why is stories very important, and how is narrative when intentionally crafted? Why is it transformational?
Look, I think there is real power in having context to stories. Firstly, to understand context in which we live our lives and our experiences. But just to kind of reflect on narrative as a practice, and I talk about it as being an approach rather than a therapy, because it is a philosophy and a way of being. But narrative was actually designed by an Australian social worker by the name of Michael White.
Wow.
And Michael drew from the ideas of cultural anthropology, humanistic psychology, and social family systems theory, and a lot of his ideas around stories was not so much about the narrating process, but getting people to understand positions of power. And when he refers to power, and drawn on the idea of a French philosopher, Michel Foucault, quite a powerful man, very influential in the world of literature, research, and as an author. He came up with the idea of marginalised groups and people, often, being marginalised and being, ostracised in society for whatever reason, but being part of those vulnerable groups, how you can tend to be influenced and conditioned to believing where there is a position of power authority, such as media, that platform of media, how influential that is to conditioning us and what we see, what we believe, and over time it becomes truth.
Yeah, wow.
And so Michael really unpacked how dominant stories like that can really impact on how we feel about ourselves. An example is, me being an Aboriginal person, I've experienced racism at its worst, to the point where I've gone from the worst struggle to turning that pain into purpose with implementing our South Australian anti-racism strategy for SA government, which was launched a couple of years ago now. But really looking at how those experiences actually kind of shape who you are, and that also positions of power create dominant discourses, that narrative actually looks at how we deconstruct those on different levels. And looking at the work of Michel Foucault, drawing on how we focus on, rather than problems, and how we are kind of subjected to being a certain way, where there are forms of resistance. And now one quote that I always reference, and a lot of people that know me, is that there are no relations to power without resistance.
Wow. What does that mean?
So what it means is what it means is you have, let's say, for example, we have Donald Trump who's just come into leadership, right? He's got some really great leadership qualities. I wouldn't necessarily say he's, on the level of intelligence. But, there is an element of how influential he is. I will give you another example. There might be a position of power in terms of our government and the way that legislation is actually put in place. Now, I think we all know that First Nations people are the most marginalised people in the country, even though we are the traditional custodians. However, when we say there are no relations to that power without resistance, examples of Australia Day and flipping that narrative into a competing narrative such as Survival Day is an example of resistance. So, and respectful resistance, where we continue to fight and say, this day actually means a day of mourning for us. There is a day of struggle. But it's kind of like how we see a dominant story and how we turn that around. So we talk about dominant discourses, and we talk about stories of injustice and pain and loss and grief and trauma. But equal to that, the narrative belief is that there are these other stories that we also need to unpack, that we're talking about stories of resistance, stories of survival, stories of strength and resilience. And so there are no relations to power without resistance is kind of that theme. But look, if I was to talk about narrative as in an approach, it is such a huge way of looking at life. It really identifies when we are, for example, media says all of these bad things and stereotypes about a particular group. Over time, people can experience internalized racism, and we start to believe these things about our own people and our own culture and about ourselves. And when we internalize those things, and what we tell ourselves actually is detrimental to our well-being. And so narrative really unpacks the story we tell ourselves and externalize that as something not part of us, but something that is its own entity that impacts on the way that we feel about ourselves. Another aspect is we all come with dominant problem stories. And sometimes we focus on that. It is the dominant story and sometimes the single story. But Michael's belief was that we have these alternative stories. We have these subordinate stories, stories that are hidden, stories that we don't take notice of. We talk about, for instance, struggling to get up in the morning and you really don't want to go about your work life you're just not in the mood. That's a dominant story. Sometimes we're not motivated, but there is this story of actually I got out of bed and I want to know a little bit more about that. And it kind of connects us to our purpose and it connects us to why. Why did it matter for you to get out of bed that day? And so these other stories, what we call the alternative or preferred stories, is kind of what is a real strength-based approach in getting people to increase their sense of personal agency, that people are, not just stuck in problems, but they're able to focus on things that they know of around their capabilities and their strengths and know-how to go about things, and that there's not just a single story or an alternative story, but there are many stories about who we are. And I think as an example, we could talk about, a person's journey around childhood trauma. We could talk about, our upbringing and all of these bad things. We could talk about racism. We could talk about, limited access to services, being in remote areas and not having the resources around us and in what we need. But we also forget to remember the stories of the resilience. So I always say, in terms of my introduction, I'm Judith, and I try to encompass all of my cultural connections in my acknowledgement. And yes, I am an EAP clinician. That's one part of my story. One part of my story is that I work for Menzies. Another part of my story is that I'm a training design and development person. I write training packages. I am connected to country. I am an auntie. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I've got all of these different stories. And so the narrative idea is that there is a richer account of identity when we have these multi-stories about us, and when we share those stories. It basically gives us a total picture of the whole person, not just one part.
Yes. Yeah. Multifaceted.
Absolutely.
Personal stories. Yeah, basically. Yeah. And like you mentioned about, taking the story out of ourselves as if we're looking at it as a third person.
Yeah.
Why is that powerful?
It is powerful because when you think about, let's just say, for instance, an issue around the feeling of being depressed. And we know the signs and the symptoms, there's a general understanding. A lot of people are diagnosing themselves on Google and those sorts of things. Yeah. But we know it's about sadness. We know it's about lack of motivation, having low energy, we're sleeping a lot more. And so we start to say, I am depressed. And what we tell ourselves really has an impact on how we feel about ourselves, the way that we think. And so when we say, I am depressed or I'm feeling depressed, that is an internalized view of I'm owning the problem or I am the problem.
Wow.
And it's almost, and I give an example of, it's like when I say I've got something wrong with me, not only is it having an impact on my sense of self and my self-worth and all of those things, but it's like carrying this 20-kilo pack of problems with me.
Yeah, wow.
And when I have this 20 kilos and I'm walking around saying, hi, my name is depression and I'm a loser and there's so much wrong with me and I could do better and I'm not good enough and I've been told this and, you know, I live my life like that. We start to ask questions about, you know, when did you first start feeling like that? You know, what effect does that feeling have on you? One really powerful thing is Michael's way of externalizing problems is by using a guide as a map. And he had this fascination with maps to guide us in conversation around how we can navigate people through these various steps to get to from an internalized problem to an externalized problem in the preferred story. So basically we look at effects of problems. We get people to take a position on that. Is this okay or not okay and how it's impacting your life? And we want to hear more about why is that so important? Why do you say that it's okay? Or why do you say it's not okay? And when I link back to that idea of what is our purpose and what is our why, when we start to talk about things that matter to us, we're not talking about I am depressed. We're talking about the depression getting in the way of what's important to me. And we're in a different territory of story. It's such that 20-kilo bag is now unpacked and it's thrown over there. And it gives people an opportunity to talk about really heavy things where they don't feel like they are the problem. So one quote that you might come across is that the person is not the problem. The problem is the problem.
So good. Wow. Judith, like how does, because see, young people don't look for help because of this big mental health stigma, and it's crazy because the past more than 1 decade of research say the same thing. How does this different perspective of seeing the problem is the problem would help with the stigma around mental health?
Look, I think I'm a little bit biased, so I think the narrative approach would fix everybody's problems in the world, if I'm completely honest.
That's awesome.
But when you do understand the theoretical underpinnings and the general approach and how it is, we call it decentered. We see clients as experts of their own lives. The clinicians aren't the experts because we come into this world of being trained that we need to know everything, we need to fix people's problems, we need to come up with solutions. But narrative takes a step back and says, I see skills and capabilities and knowledge in you, and I know you are multi-storied and there's real qualities about this person that you are.
Because she or he knows more of themselves rather than the counselor.
That's right. That's right. And we're skilled to bring out those stories as narrative therapists to draw that out and actually allow people to take notice of the things that go unnoticed within them. And so it's really empowering. And I think the approach in terms of services to be able to create spaces around engagement. If we know our young people are not going to be first up judged or treated differently, like something is wrong with them, what we call pathologizing practices, we need to diagnose or put them into a category. I think it makes conversations much lighter when we can understand problems or presentations of distress within the context of something going on in their lives. And that makes a real difference. It really does, rather than you got a mental health problem. Let's talk about that and let's diagnose you. Let's actually come in and say, I want to get to know who you are. Tell me your story. Tell me about things that keep you strong. Tell me about significant people in your life. Tell me about how you've gotten yourself through those times before, and understanding that states of distress come within the context of a problem. So, you know, context is circumstances leading to the current situation. If we don't take that into consideration in our work, then we're kind of missing the whole point in why we engage with people. And I think young people, there is so much judgment associated with wanting to access services. There's a lot of shame. And look, society in general is to blame for that. but I think there is real opportunity in terms of services to be able to get things done better. And I just have to highlight the work that you're doing, Christel, is just phenomenal in being able to provide a platform for young people to engage, to talk about problems in society, not as in problems in individuals or a particular population group, but mental health problems in general, in a very non-threatening, non-judgmental way, to generalise and to also be able to create that platform for people to connect, raise awareness, and always have something to reflect on when they, have participated in some of the work that you do. So I think, in terms of the work and progressing in the digital space, there is real, just innovative ways that we can really progress with making society a better place and more safe.
Thank you so much. And yes, thank you so much for contributing so much wisdom in this space as well. And
Thank you.
I think if I could address this thing, Judith, 5 years ago, I come across this new principles or like newfound truth that changed my life for good since then. And we're getting deep, guys. Are you ready? So Brene Brown, she was a researcher about shame. So her whole PhD was about researching shame. And then, oh my goodness, which is the underlying of like why stigma becomes so predominant, right? Because people don't want to be shameful, right? Yeah. One thing that I learned that changed my life actually was like, when people see me walking around, I like smile and like, laugh with like people and stuff. Some of my friends would say, Christel, you don't have problems, do you? And I'm like, that's not true, right? Yeah. Of course, I've got a lot of problems. You just don't know what's in my heart. There's turmoil there, But then one day I was reading her book, and then she gave this analogy about like, the how do I call the thing that you take stove and like the protector, the hand protector, not the glove, but basically it's like kitchenware where you can use it to like take hot stuff from the oven, right? And so in that book she talked about vulnerability, the power of vulnerability, whereas when our hearts get hurt in the past, be it trauma or be it bullying or like whatever bitterness or like disappointments that life comes with, right? I mean, when I say comes with, I'm sure everyone has their own story and no one is just never hurt. Yeah. Now, of course, we don't want to be in that space of pain all the time, right? And so there are mechanisms of coping that people may not realize that that's what they're doing because they want to numb the pain. Yeah. Or like, not address or ignore it or like bury it, right? At that point I just realized that she mentioned if you want to avoid that hot oven, and that's why you use that glove, but then you don't take out that glove after you deal with that hotness, and then I go and handshake you, I couldn't feel that handshake or like that warmth. Yeah. Like, because my hands are covered with the glove. Yeah. It's just like, if the negative emotion or like the painful past is like the hot, and you cover your hand to protect yourself from the hot, unfortunately you also cover your hand from feeling, the handshake. And in this case, if we numb our hearts and don't feel the pain, unfortunately, at the same time, we numb our hearts from all other emotion, including joy. Yeah. So that changed my life, Judith. Yeah. And then from there, I start thinking, right, so if we want to address, like you said, right, put the narrative out there, address the problem so that we can heal, like the pain of healing itself, yeah. Maybe more painful than not addressing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's funny because when we think about trauma in general, everyone's got different levels of resilience and coping mechanisms to get through, and I really like that analogy, and I probably want to go and read about that now. But I think it's really important that when we think about trauma, and I guess from a visual perspective in all of my teachings over the years, I've tended to think about a baseline of resilience, of well-being. We've got this beautiful straight line. This is our state of wellness. This is our everyday work. This is Christel coming around with a big smile every day because she's got nothing. There is nothing going wrong in her life. It's all absolutely perfect, right? And so this is our state of well-being. And, in order to understand when we experience a trauma, it takes us down here. We're no longer on that baseline. And that experience of trauma is, in order to demonstrate that you are resilient, we need to bounce back, right, equally. And according to the Latin word, resilience actually comes from the being able to bend the metal back to its original state. So if you think about baseline and trauma experience here, and we go back to baseline to demonstrate resilience, I like to talk about the idea of post-trauma growth. Now, post-trauma growth takes us to a next level of resilience.
Wow.
And I think when we come through complex traumas as well, provided people have the right support, they can go either way, really, in terms of how much they can decline or how much they can actually grow through and come out in a better way. And that comes down to services and support. And I guess I want to just reference a man by the name of Daniel Fisher, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia at a young age, and over time he had healed from that. He went and studied his medicine and came out a psychiatrist, and started to educate the world about recovery, the empowerment model around recovery, that when we do experience those traumas, it's okay to sit with that vulnerability and it's okay to feel those feelings. But we also need to know that we're never, ever alone, and we need to tap into our supports and our resources around us in order to actually manage that coping to get you back to baseline. Now, some people absolutely grow from that. The deep pain can sometimes turn into the extreme of absolutely being strongly advocating for policy changes and a lot of things. But I think I want to go back to the idea of where all of us have some level of lived experience. I think that is a real driver and motivator to do some really great work. I know for me personally, my own personal mental health challenges have really helped me to be a great clinician in this space, because there is that different level of empathy and understanding. At any point I've experienced something quite, and look, I have to say, lots of suicides in communities, witnessing domestic violence. I've come from a background that has been less fortunate than the average Australian, let's just say that in simpler terms. I won't go into details. But I've actually really, from a child experiencing all sorts of trauma, you can, with the right support, I'll go back to right support, use that as an opportunity and a mechanism to be able to turn that life around. And I think there's one thing I want to just quote here, and it's something that I've talked about in all of my teachings, is when we think about how we use a narrative approach in our work and how we respond to critical incidents and crises, in Chinese language, there is no real word around crises, crisis actually. It translates to opportunity.
Right.
So I think if we look at things and how we use language and discourse is quite powerful in saying, here is a crisis, but no, hang on, here is an opportunity for change. So I think there is real important things that we can reflect on in terms of the language we use. Now, language is so important to how policies are designed, how media is actually shaped, how we tell stories about ourselves, how much we're exposed to. But I think, at the end of the day, we are completely in a different day and age now, different
Yes.
generations coming through,
Yes.
different ways of how we can use the power of language and storytelling to really get better outcomes for service providers, for clinicians, for researchers, whatever it might be, on how we can do things better, because there is a real there's still significant gaps in terms of society responses. And
by any means though, like what we're doing in Mirror XR is not to substitute mental health professionals and or like these really helpful resources that are already in place, right? It's actually to bridge the gap so that people are more aware and like they could get the help they need without having to be laid back by the 20 kilo bag that we
absolutely
talked earlier, right? Now, last question in regards to this, Judith, is like, how do you see in our story, right? Spoiler alert, guys. In our story, right? We get this like 25 years old Nora Leaves, which is a very famous Australian singer-songwriter, right? But then we want to trail back to her 18 years old where she self-doubt herself so much, wasn't sure if she should even pursue her dreams, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's battling about like self-worth and like, identity and all these things, right? How do you think getting the player to be in the mindscape of 18 years old Nora Leaves and like seeing how she, face her battles, help this young teenager to reflect inward and gain new perspective?
Yeah, I think the power of introspection is really important when we can get people to really reflect on in internal thoughts and feelings. I think one thing that's really important to note is when we're asking people about the bad times in their lives, not to ever re-trigger a trauma because that can end up in a chaos. But in this scenario, we use the concept of rich story development, or also known as reauthoring. So we allow a person to tell their story. It could be we'll focus on trauma back in the day. But if I was to ask this young person, at that point in time, tell me about what was important to you. Where did those values come from? Who else in your life was around at that time? Tell me about some of the things you learned from that. Tell me about some of the hopes you had at that point in time. Tell me about some of the things you did for yourself to get yourself out of those hard times. And it really starts to build this story of strength and capability and resilience and know-how. And then we start to see this pattern over time that we get from A to B. We're talking about a problem story historically, but we always talk about being double storied and double listening. So when we talk to people, we talk about problems back then and the trauma story, but we're also carefully listening for things what we call unique outcomes or sparkling moments that Michael referred to. And those are the things that we want to draw on in terms of rich story development. We ask about action in time, when, where, how, and who. We ask about things that matter, and it really provides a better, stronger account of this person's identity. And it also increases their sense of personal agency in that it gets them to reflect on what they overcame. And we can ask then leading questions, hypothesizing what might happen tomorrow if you were in a similar situation, or what advice would you give to that person down the track. So it's a forward-thinking, motivational way of engaging people to maintain their stories of strength, resilience, using their skills to get through tough times. It is a real rich process. So, I think to get people to reflect on that in a very safe way, like I said, without triggering any trauma there. It is such a powerful, I mean, in all the years that I've practiced this way of working, I've had people in tears not realising how strong they have been to overcome, and not the pain of thinking back to the painful times, but the pain of feeling, oh my goodness, overcome that what I've overcome is actually a testimony to who I am as a person.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I think we need to tell more of our stories of healing process than hurt. Hey.
That's right.
Yeah, wow. I don't want to end this podcast, but I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you have comments, questions, and anything you want to chat, just drop in the comment down below and we'll try to address in the next podcast. See ya. Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you find this helpful, please subscribe and share to your circle of friends. Remember, you can also follow us on social media, namely on LinkedIn and on Instagram at bridgeit.pod. And don't forget to share your feedbacks, your thoughts, or repost a slice of conversation that inspires you. Don't forget, use the hashtag #IBridget. See you in the next podcast.